So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. Now, it's been a couple days since we've talked about Detroit Lions training camp, and as they are just a week away from playing their first preseason game, I wanted to take a look at the injury updates, take a look at the riders and fallers, and really just kind of get an overall view of what the Lions have done over the last couple of days, how this roster has changed over the last couple of days, and where we sit with 8 days until the first preseason game for the 2023 Detroit Lions. Now, starting off, we're going to take a look at the injury report, as the Detroit Lions unfortunately did have a player suffer a likely season-ending injury a few days ago at practice, and that player was Shane Zylstra. Now, Shane Zylstra was an undrafted free agent in the 2020 offseason. He was coming out of, I believe, Minnesota State and went undrafted in the 2020 NFL Draft. He was picked up by the Minnesota Vikings as a practice squad player and as a tryout, didn't end up making the roster, and then eventually found his way to Detroit, where last year he had a pretty decent season, didn't have very many yards or receptions, but did contribute 4 touchdowns, including a 5-reception, 26-yard game with 3 touchdowns versus the Carolina Panthers. He's been a pretty good receiving tight end for the Detroit Lions and was expected to have a minimal role with the Detroit Lions offense, of course, with the tight ends that they've brought in and acquired, but was still expected to be a part of the Detroit Lions offense, likely being the tight end 3 or 4, but still having a red zone role and a clear receiving role in the offense after what he was able to do late last season. Now, Shane Zylstra unfortunately did suffer a knee injury. He was hit low in camp on a couple of days ago and was carted off the field, was taken back to the medical services, and wasn't able to return to practice. Now, although I don't believe we have a 100% clear view of what the severity of the injury is, we do know that it is likely a 6-month injury, and it is said that it is likely going to take 6 months for him to recover, placing him back on the football field or placing him back even into start of training in early to mid-January. Now, that obviously doesn't leave him a lot of time for the NFL season. That leaves him just enough time for the playoffs if he is able to return it, if he's able to get back on the field very quickly after his recovery time has ended. But this likely is a season-ending injury for Shane Zylstra, which is really unfortunate because, like I said, he was a pretty big part of the receiving game a season ago. And even though we have Laporta, even though we have James Mitchell, even though we have, Brock Wright, he was a pretty good receiving threat for the Detroit Lions and had chemistry with Jared Goff and could have been a really good depth piece for the Detroit Lions and kind of a, secret weapon that nobody really knows about, but can obviously be very efficient and effective in the red zone. Now, the Detroit Lions do have a couple other injury news and rumors. However, these ones are a little bit more positive, as the Detroit Lions are returning several players from injuries and have several players returning to practice. This includes Penei Sewell, who returned to practice yesterday in concussion protocol. He has not practiced the last 2 days, but is slowly returning and slowly getting back into the rotation. He's slowly getting back into team drills. And even though it is a slow return, as concussion protocol is very serious, he is officially back on the field, as is Sam Laporta. Sam Laporta, the rookie tight end from the University of Iowa, did suffer an ankle injury a few days ago, was taken away from practice a little bit early, did walk off under his own power, but took a couple days to heal, took a couple days to rest, and has officially returned to Detroit Lions training camp. Marvin Jones has been on the PUP list since the first day of camp, but officially returned yesterday and was seen making several plays in team drills as well as one-on-one competitions. And then Free agent cornerback Emmanuel Mosley is considered day-to-day by Dan Campbell. He's a player that was put on the PUP list right alongside Marvin Jones, has yet to play and has yet to really practice at Detroit Lions training camp, and for most of it hasn't been at Allen Park or team facilities, but he is expected back I believe he was expected back yesterday and has been in the building the last day or so and is expected to be day-to-day and could come off the PUP list and return to practice at any point over the next week, hopefully being ready for the first preseason game, but very likely being ready to return for the first week of the actual NFL season, even if he's not quite ready by week 1 of the preseason. Now, moving past the injuries, taking a look at the players on the field. The Lions have had a lot of big name players stand out. They've had quite a few big name players make a lot of plays at Detroit Lions training camp. Now, I'm not going to take a look at the obvious stars. I'm not going to take a look at the Amon-Ra St. Brown, the Jared Goff, the guys we've talked about before at length, but I will mention a couple of players that are starting to play really, really well down the stretch of this first couple weeks of training camp, moving into the first week of the preseason. And funnily enough, most of them are defenders. And James Houston has just been a player that continues to show his ability to get to the quarterback and likely will return as a big-time playmaker in 2023. Now, another player that is making a lot of plays on the defensive side of the ball is Brian Branch, a player that, like James Houston, started off with the twos, with the Lions' revamped secondary with Emmanuel Mosley, with Cam Sutton, with Jerry Jacobs being in the mix, with C.J. Gardner-Johnson being kind of the same position and the same role. We haven't seen a whole lot of Brian Branch until CJ went down with a lower leg injury, in which Brian Branch started taking first-team reps. Brian Branch started making a lot of plays and has since never looked back. He has been a great playmaker over the last couple of weeks of mini camps, OTAs, and training camps. He has been a phenomenal leader, showing great instincts and making a ton of plays on the football, not giving a single easy rep to any of the wide receivers, including Khalif Raymond, who he was running stride for stride with down the field. Khalif Raymond, of course, having that 4.3 speed over the top burner speed. Brian Branch being able to keep up with him step for step and forcing multiple PBUs as they go back and forth with a little mini rivalry in between the two of them in the team's locker room. Now, Derek Barnes, the third-year linebacker from Purdue, has also been making plays. A player that had a lot of expectations after his first preseason, played really well his rookie season, and kind of took a backseat his second year as Malcolm Rodriguez really excelled early. But Derek Barnes has reportedly come into year 3 of training camp and been an unstoppable force. Him and Alex Anzalone have taken a majority of the first-team linebacker reps and continue to hold that position going in, again, 1 week out from the first preseason game of 2023. Derek Barnes is a player that started his rookie year, made a couple big plays as a reserve his sophomore season, and now going into his third year as an NFL pro is finally starting to look like the starting linebacker a lot of people thought he was going to be last season. And he's kind of taking that big third-year leap, both from a mental standpoint as well as a physical playmaking standpoint. Now, Josh Pascal, the second-year pass rusher from the University of Kentucky, is also making a name for himself in training camp. Having multiple big TFLs with the first and second string defensive line, he's a player that didn't get a training camp last year, didn't get a mini camp, didn't get an offseason due to his injuries and due to time healing, but he is now on the field. He's now making plays at Detroit Lions training camp, and he has been a really good run stuffer, as well as showing some versatility on the defensive line, as well as getting to the quarterback time and time again. He is a guy that was drafted top 50 for a reason, a guy that some people last season had a top 50 grade on, and some people even had a first round grade on Josh Pascal, the pass rusher from Kentucky. He is a culture guy. He is a leader. And even though the Lions have a very deep pass rush rotation, I would not be surprised if Josh Pascal was a star in the preseason and got a fair amount of reps in the regular season, rotating in for Aiden Hutchinson, getting after the quarterback, and adding that constant pressure and rotation the Lions have been missing for a couple of seasons. Now, both of the Detroit Lions undrafted free agent defensive backs have been making plays. Stephon Gilmore, I know, had an interception in the 11-on-11 practice, the one that I was at in training camp. He had a big turnover and was able to kind of turn the tide for the defense, create a turnover, and swing some big momentum, as well as Starling Thomas going toe-to-toe with Jameson Williams down the boundary, two guys with electric speed going at it, and both having some really good blows in that battle. Starling Thomas has looked like arguably a starting caliber cornerback in the Detroit Lions training camp so far, will easily start as a depth cornerback, will easily start probably as a gunner on the Detroit Lions special teams, and will make a huge impact on day one. But both UDFA players are playing very, very well, and I wanted to give both of them their credits because both of them have made plays in team drills as well as being very tough to beat in one-on-one situations. Now, unfortunately, training camp is not all good. With all the good that comes, there is a little bit of bad to follow, and we do have a couple of players that I would consider fallers in this particular segment. Those three players are going to be Jack Campbell, the first-round pick from Iowa, Malcolm Rodriguez, the second-year linebacker from Oklahoma State, as well as Jameson Williams, the second-year player from Alabama. Now, before I start talking about these players, fallers does not necessarily mean that they are bad. Fallers does not mean that they are necessarily playing poorly or even that they are falling necessarily as far as getting worse as players. What fallers essentially means is that they aren't working their way up the depth chart. They're not where we thought they would be at this point, and they aren't necessarily jumping up the depth chart. They're falling even a little bit down the depth chart as the training camp goes on. But that doesn't mean these players aren't good. That doesn't mean these players are playing poorly. And this certainly doesn't mean that these players are busts or poor picks or even bad players to begin with. So I just wanted to mention that before we get into it, because even though the fallers is kind of a negative connotation, that doesn't mean these players are necessarily playing bad. Now, starting off with Jack Campbell, the first round selection, linebacker from the University of Iowa. Jack Campbell is a young linebacker. He has not played linebacker for his entire career and is still relatively young at the position. He's learning a lot, but he's also excelling, and he is learning a ton in training camp. He's made massive strides at the position. He's become a really good linebacker and is even forcing turnovers on the second team offense and rotating in with the first string defense as well. He's a player that is kind of mostly with the twos and a little bit with the ones, whereas a lot of the other rookies right now are mostly with the ones and a little bit with the twos. Jack Campbell has been making plays. He's been a rotational guy. He's been a player that has found the field on the first team defense, just isn't necessarily a starter, which is where most people thought he would be at this point. Same thing with Malcolm Rodriguez. Malcolm Rodriguez is not a bad football player. He's not playing bad football, but with the emergence of Derek Barnes, he's really pushed these two guys down the depth chart, with those two continuing to work as the 1 and 2 linebackers on the second string defense. But Malcolm Rodriguez, again, continues to make plays on special teams and continues to make plays on the second string defense. He just isn't quite the starter he was a season ago, therefore falling down the depth chart a little bit. Now, Jameson Williams is a very special case. Jameson Williams has returned from injury. He's officially back on the field making plays, and he's had a lot of ups and downs. He's had a lot of criticism from the media, and he is, of course, a very, very controversial player in this context. Now, Jameson Williams' first practice back was a little bit up and down. He ran some really good routes, created some incredible separation, and was wide open several times, but did have a couple drops very early on and wasn't quite able to make the big plays that we wanted him to make. Now, he did make a massive block to break off a huge run. He showed his willingness to block, showed his willingness to get open, showed his ability to separate and get open, just wasn't able to really put together the final piece of getting the football in his hands. But then he came back the second day, had again some great routes, created some incredible separation, and was even able to connect with a 50-plus yard bomb touchdown from Jared Goff against the first string defense. He made several big plays, including incredible sideline catches, incredible deep balls, as well as just the ability to show that big play mentality that he has. And a lot of people are going back and forth. Dan Campbell came out and said, he's probably never going to have elite hands, but his separation and playmaking ability is going to be unmatched in the time that he gets. Right? I think that's the expectation we need to have with Jameson Williams, right? We've all become accustomed to Amon-Ra St. Brown catching 200 passes in a row, not dropping the football once in an entire season, and that's not the case with every wide receiver. Even with some of the elite wide receivers in the NFL, Jamar Chase led the league in drops last season despite being a top 100, arguably top 50, 30 player in the NFL. He is a top 3 wide receiver at his position and led the NFL in drops. Drops doesn't make you a poor wide receiver. What makes you a poor wide receiver is not getting open. never catching the football, never having that big playability. And those are things that aren't true about Jameson Williams. Jameson Williams may very well at the end of the season be up there with 6-7 drops. He might be up there with Jamar Chase leading the league in drops, but he also is going to lead the league in big plays. He's also going to be very high in the league in yards per reception. He's also going to break off 5, 6, 7 plays every single year. That's just going to wow the team. That's going to force the defense to game plan around you. And that is where his value comes from. That is why he was taken with a first round pick. He might not get 120 receptions, right? He might not get the Amon-Ra St. Brown treatment on third down, but you better believe he's going to get a lot of targets. He's going to make a lot of big plays. And yeah, he might drop the ball here and there. He might miss a couple big plays because of his inconsistent hands, but he's going to make several other plays to make up for it. And by the end of the game, when Jameson Williams goes off for a 200-yard game like Jamar Chase, when he goes off for a huge game-breaking touchdown, you're going to forget about the drop passes, right? He's going to make up for it with his big playability. And that's why I'm not worried about Jameson Williams being a good wide receiver. It's why I'm not worried about his lack of elite hands, is because you don't necessarily need elite hands. You don't need the most consistent hands to be a great wide receiver. Jamar Chase has shown that. A lot of other really good wide receivers around the league have had some dropped passes, and Jameson Williams may fit into that category, but is also going to lead the league in yards per reception, is also going to lead the league in big plays and be a great player for the Detroit Lions, regardless of how many drops he has. So with that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. That is the Detroit Lions training camp update with injuries, with risers, with fallers, and of course, all things Detroit Lions related. The Detroit Lions are 8 days away from their first training camp. Football is back tonight with the Hall of Fame game. So we are very, very close to the start of the 2023 season. But with all that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below how you feel about the risers, how you feel about the fallers, how you feel about the Lions getting healthy, and of course about the Shane Zylstra injury. Very curious what you guys have to say. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions!